Okay, good morning. Welcome. Thank you very much for being here a little bit earlier today because we have the great pleasure and honor to have with us Geir Pedersen, the Special Envoy for Syria for the UN. As you know, the formula of this prequels to the briefings is that we will have Mr. Pedersen addressing you with Jennifer. You will have the chance to ask questions, but he has to leave. He has a hard exit, maximum at 35. So we will have to try to be short. Afterwards, we will have a 2-3 minutes break, and we will go into the regular press briefing. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Jennifer for a short introduction, and then to Geir.
Good morning. Thank you to those of us who are also joining us online. You should have the option for Arabic. Just to note that Mr. Pedersen briefed the Security Council in closed consultations last night. As you will have seen, he has just returned from Doha, where he met with key players, and he was recently in Damascus. After he briefs, we'll have time for a few questions, so please have those ready. Mr. Pedersen.
Thank you. Great to see you again. Let me start by saying that what has happened the last few days, no one, absolutely no one, saw this coming. I believe even the armed groups that are now in control of Damascus have been surprised of what has happened. But of course, what we have seen is a watershed moment in Syria's history, with President Assad and his government ousted from power, following what can only be called an extraordinary military offensive that saw Damascus fall within 2 weeks. And of course, what we basically saw was that the military of the Assad regime collapsed. But, and this is important, the situation is still moving fast. Syria is now at a crossroad with great opportunities, but also with grave risks. And we need really to look at both. We know that, of course, HDS is now the dominant group in control of Damascus, but it's important also to remember that they are not the only armed group in Damascus. After the fall of Aleppo, we saw a very broad range of armed opposition groups that mobilized, including what we will call the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army in the north, and the so-called former Southern Front that obviously came from the south, and also other groups that basically erupted what I would call spontaneously as armed new formations. And let me now emphasize this, and it's really an essential point. For now, much of what some call rebel-controlled Syria is under the control of what I would call a patchwork of groups who are coordinating well for now, but they are not fully or formally united. It's important that we don't see conflict between these groups. Let me also say that, by and large, we have seen reassuring statements from the HDS and the different armed groups, but there are still some issues of law and order. But we are hopeful that it will be possible to keep law and order. But also, let me mention this, the conflict in the northeast is not over. There has been clashes between the Syrian National Army, the opposition group, and the SDF. We are calling, obviously, for calm also in this area. And then a very troubling development. We are continuing to see Israeli movements and bombardments into Syrian territory. This needs to stop. This is extremely important. Let me then just give what I would call 3 key messages. We need to continue to stress the protection of civilians. I have appealed to the armed actors to maintain good conduct, law and order, and to protect civilians in line with international humanitarian law and preserve public institutions. And as I said, I've heard positive statements from the HDS and the other armed groups that they intend to continue to reassure civilians that they want to be inclusive, especially with minorities. My second point, linked to what I said a little bit earlier, we need to continue to work for de-escalation. We need to see a stop to the Israeli attacks, and we need to make sure that the conflict in the northeast stops, and we need to make sure that there are no conflict developing between the different armed groups. But then third, and this is perhaps today my most important message, we need to focus on the need for credible and transitional arrangements in Damascus. This means that there needs to be what I call orderly arrangements. But it also means, and this of course, I don't need to repeat it, but it's extremely important, it needs to be inclusive arrangements. That is ensuring the representation of the broadest possible spectrum of the Syrian society and the Syrian parties. And let me say that if this is not happening, then we risk new conflict in Syria. I believe that this is understood by all groups, but what we now need to see as this is implemented on the ground in Syria. And it is my hope that if we do this, if we unite the Syrian parties, we bring together the different Syrian communities, then this could be the real beginning of something new for Syria. And importantly, I think then we would also see a united international community supporting the Syrian transition. Then we could start to look at lifting sanctions, increase humanitarian support, start economic recovery. We could see the return of Syrian refugees, of internally displaced returning to their homes, and we could start to see, as the High Commissioner for Human Rights mentioned yesterday, that justice is finally reached. All of this needs the cooperation of the international parties and the Syrian parties. And I can promise you that the United Nations will do whatever we can to help in this situation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Geir. It's really appreciated. I have a list of questions long like this, so please be fast. I'll start with Jeremy.
Just as also, too, if we can take 3 questions off the go, and then Mr. Pedersen will answer them together. Thank you.
Mr. Pedersen.
Let's do it this way.
Quick ones.
Jeremy.
First question is, do you have any contact with HTS so far, or the armed groups right now in Damascus, and how much do you hope to achieve with those groups that you didn't achieve with the Assad regime? And the second quick one would be about the moves by a certain number of European countries suspending or denying the refugee seeking asylum process in Europe. Do you welcome those moves, or do you think it is too early to tell?
Thank you very much. Yuri Aprelev, Syria Novosti.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for coming to brief us. I have a question also about HTS. This is the first time we have an ex-terrorist organization. I mean, it was Al-Qaeda in Syria that is taking the power in one country. What is your recommendation to all the countries that are considering HTS as terrorists? Do they have to speak with them? Do they have to clean them from the terrorist list? What is your counsel for that?
Thank you very much. Yes, please, madam. Can you introduce yourself for Mr.
Jim from China Media Group. I have a question. What is your plan for the next, and any kind of the discussions will be had in the near future? Thank you.
Geir? In the future, any discussion in
the future? Let me start with the question of HTS. That is obviously a key question. But let me also emphasize, they are not only, as I said, they are not only the armed group that are now in Damascus. So, as you all know, in Security Council Resolution 2254, al-Nusra was listed as a terrorist organization. This is obviously a complicating factor for all of us. But we also have to be honest. We have to look at the facts and to see what has happened during the last 9 years. It is now 9 years since that resolution was adopted. And the reality is, so far, is that the HDS and also the other armed groups have been sending good messages to the Syrian people. They have been sending messages of unity, of inclusiveness, and frankly speaking, also we have seen in Aleppo and in Hama, we have also seen, reassuring things on the ground. But as I stated at the very beginning, there have also been challenges. On Sunday, in particularly in Damascus, there were lootings, there were robberies, there were, invasion of public buildings, of private homes. But this seems to have stopped, and that is a good thing. But what we need now to see is, of course, that the good statements and what we have seen on the ground at the beginning, that this is now followed up in practice in the days and the weeks ahead of us. And the most important test will be how the transitional arrangements in Damascus is organized and implemented. These arrangements, as I have emphasized many times, needs to be inclusive. If they are really inclusive of all the different groups and all the communities in Syria, as I said, then there is a possibility for a new beginning. And then I do believe that the international community will look at the listing of HTS again, because then there is a real change that has happened. And you will also have heard that there are discussions, and I think Giuliani himself mentioned this in an interview with the CNN, that they are discussing the possibility of dismantling HTS. So again, let me emphasize, we are still in what I would call a very fluid period. Things have not settled. There is a real opportunity for change, but this opportunity needs to be grasped by the Syrians themselves and supported by the UN and the international community. What I'm now telling you, I think, is an advice from all key international actors. As Jennifer mentioned, I was in Doha. I discussed this of course, with the Turkish foreign minister, with the Russian, with the Iranian, but also with the Arab foreign ministers. And we all united behind this message, that we need to see what they are saying be implemented on the ground. And this is a huge challenge. And here also, let me just link to what I said earlier about the Israeli attacks. Extremely important that we don't see any action from any international actor that destroys the possibility for this transformation in Syria to take place. Then I think there was a question about the refugees. Let me give a very strong appeal that the situation in Syria is still fluid. We need to be aware of that things have not consolidated. But at the same time, I know from speaking to Syrians all over that they are full of hope and optimism, and many do want to go back. Let me just mention one example to you. When I was leaving Doha, there was a Syrian family that came towards me. They were living in Sweden. And they said, Mr. Pedersen, we are so hopeful. We know there are many challenges. We left Hama 10 years ago. We really want to go back. We hope it will be possible. And I think that is really something that many, many Syrians are hoping for to this day. But let's make sure that the international community, that we are helping them in this process, because there are livelihood challenges still in Syria. As you all know, the humanitarian situation is disastrous. The economy has collapsed. So there is a lot of responsibilities that we really need to do, and we need to do that together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ayerde. Go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, Catherine from German Radio and TV ARD. Just one question about the process starting now, the political progress. You say it has to be inclusive. How far do you think members of the old regime should be integrated in this process?
Thank you very much. Laurent Sierro, Swiss News Agency Online.
Yeah, thank you for the briefing. You mentioned Israel since your stakeout in Doha on Sunday. Have you had any engagement with Israeli authorities on the appeal that you're launching to cease the bombings? And with any Syrian armed group, have you had any direct engagement? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mohamed Arslan, Anadolu Ansi.
Thank you so much, Alessandra. Sir, thank you for the brief. My question will be about Israel also. Israel has invaded the buffer zone in the Golan Heights that it occupied after the collapse of Assad regime in Syria. And there are also reports that says Israel army has crossed this zone and entered Syrian territory. My questions are, do you think that this step is against international law? And also, do you call on Israel to leave the Syrian lands that it occupied? Thank you.
Let me start with the question about the old regime. Of course, this is an extremely crucial question. And I think here I have noticed that what's coming out from Damascus is that there is a need for justice, but that there is also a need for working together with people who served within the government structure in Damascus. There is an appeal that state institutions should be kept. And I think it was rather telling, I just want to mention this, that when I briefed the Security Council yesterday, I received a message from the Syrian ambassador to the United Nations in New York. And he was then addressing me on behalf of the authorities in Damascus. So that is still functioning. And my hope is that we will be able to see that this kind of cooperation is continuing. In other words, a focus on the need to keep state institutions and making sure, as I said, that all communities are included. And I think if these principles are followed, the Syrians will be able to sort out the distinctions between these different important questions. Then, as I said on Israel, I am not in contact with the Israelis, but of course the United Nations in New York, they are. And, the peacekeepers on the Golan Heights are, of course, in daily contact with the Israelis. And, of course, the message from New York is the same, that what we're seeing is a violation of the disengagement agreement in 1974. So we will obviously, together with our colleagues in New York, follow this extremely closely in the hours and days ahead. Listen, really appreciate this opportunity to see you again, and let's hope for a better future for Syria. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Jennifer, the word of the end?
Just in closing, the Deputy Special Envoy for Syria, Ms. Najat Rashdi, is currently convening the humanitarian task force, so we will provide you with any notes from that meeting when it concludes. And we just also want to note that we have observed an increase in media freedom in many areas of Syria in recent days, including many of your colleagues. We acknowledge this development, and we urge all parties to respect media freedom and workers and journalists, emphasizing that they are civilians who must be protected. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please stay. We will wait for 2 minutes for Mr. Pedersen to leave, and we will continue with the briefing. And we will hear from Syria on the humanitarian situation from Jens. Thank you. Okay, so let's continue with the press briefing of this morning, Tuesday, 10th of December. We have, unfortunately, Mr. Pedersen had to leave, but Jennifer is here. So I had still quite a few questions for him for the Office of the Special Envoy, and I will give you the floor to ask them to Jennifer, who will be able to help. Okay, so I had seen Musa Asir Mayedin. Musa, you have to unmute yourself. It might be a technical problem, so let me go to the next one, and then we'll try to come back to Musa. Gabriela Sotomayor.
Yes, thank you very much, Alessandra. Gabriela Sotomayor, Proceso. So my question is, what about the Syrian army, the soldiers? What treatment are they receiving in Syria? Thank you.
I won't get into the specifics of any one party. I'll just reiterate what Mr. Pedersen said, that the goal is a unified, inclusive Syria, reflecting what Syrians want, which is supported by the international community, and that all conduct activities are conducted in line with international law.
Thank you, Jennifer. Musa, can you try again? Maybe now it will work. No, it doesn't. Okay, let me go to Albert Totti, the German press agency.
Yes, hello, thanks. I have a question that was asked twice directly to Mr. Pedersen. It's a simple yes or no question. Has he been in contact with HTS? Yes or no?
Mr. Pedersen has noted that he has been in contact with all relevant parties. So the Office of the Special Envoy has been in touch with HTS. He has acknowledged that the situation has shifted significantly in recent days and that there are challenges ahead, but that he will continue to work with all parties and that UN engagement with these parties will be guided strictly by compliance with international humanitarian law and other relevant frameworks and will continue to do so in the future.
Imen Kerji, Kuna.
Oh, thank you so much. Actually, yeah, all questions are already asked to Mr. Pedersen, but I have just one simple question. What is the next step now? We'll say the dialogue here in Geneva included all the parties, let's say, all the parties, and the other one is about actually, you know, the more than 300 attacks, Israeli attacks, and this huge invasion of Syria by the Israeli army. So what is the next step vis-a-vis Israeli authorities? So I know there is a condemnation, there is a, let's say, what Mr. Peterson said, the dialogue with the Israeli, but what is the next step actually? Do you see any hope for a better future with these attacks in Syria? But thank you.
I can't say it better than Mr. Pedersen said. What we need to see immediately is a de-escalation by all actors. That includes Israel, and that the civilian protection is paramount. Regarding details of the convening of who and when, those details are not available yet. When they are, I will make sure to get them to you.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I don't see other questions on this subject, but we will keep talking about Syria because Jens has another. Oh, sorry, there's another one. Jan Ebermann. We'll hear from Jens on the humanitarian side now. Jan.
Yes, good morning. Jan Herbermann, Tagesspiegel, Berlin, and other German media. I was wondering, could you please elaborate on the resolution 2254? Is it still the legal basis for upcoming talks? And since it is almost 10 years old, I suppose it should be updated in order to be relevant.
While United Nations Security Council Resolution 2254 remains pivotal, it's essential to recognize how the context has changed significantly, as you noted, since it was adopted in 2015. However, I will state that 2254 underscores at its core that Syria's future is a decision for its own people, and that will remain central in any talks moving forward.
Thank you very much, Jen. I think this really concludes the list of questions, but of course, Jennifer is available if you have more. But let's stay on Syria, and I'll give you the floor now, Jens, for an update on the humanitarian situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Alessandra, and good morning, everyone, and also from me, thank you for the briefing from the Special Envoy. I have some humanitarian updates as things are unfolding in Syria. Still a highly fluid situation. As of yesterday, all humanitarian organizations in Idlib and northern Aleppo have resumed operations. The 3 border crossings from Turkey used by the United Nations to deliver assistance remain open, and we are providing assistance in the northwest, including to those who have been newly displaced. In Aleppo, partners are providing basic assistance, including food, health and nutrition services, and support for access to clean water. In the northeast, we are also getting supplies out to the people who have been displaced from Aleppo Governorate, and medical units have been deployed in reception centers and schools. So we are supporting those reception centers for the displaced, providing food, water, fuel, tents, blankets and hygiene kits, and supporting waste removal and health needs. However, after nearly 14 years of conflict in Syria, the needs are enormous. Before the recent events, nearly 17 million people, including millions of internally displaced people, already required humanitarian assistance. And since the 28th of November, more than 1 million people, mostly women and children, have been displaced across Idlib, Aleppo, Hama and Homs. Some have reportedly begun returning home in recent days. We also have reports that health facilities are currently overwhelmed, with hospitals operating at limited capacity due to shortages of staff, medicine and supplies. Humanitarian partners continue to provide trauma care, maintain blood banks and vaccinations, among other activities. Many border crossings have been closed, and that is disrupting supply chains. Shortages of bread and other key items are pushing prices upwards. So the bottom line is that the humanitarian needs are growing and a scaled-up response is urgently required. Money is, as always, an issue. Our $4 billion appeal for this year is currently less than a third funded. So that's where we are. But allow me to add, because many of you have followed Syria, as have I, for the past 13 or 14 years. This is a momentous time. Remember when, back in 2011, people in Syria first rose up, took to the street, and voiced their aspirations. And then, in the years that followed, being killed and injured in astonishing numbers, barrel-bombed, besieged, starved, poison-gassed, detained, and disappeared. We have briefed on it. You have reported on it. But no one wants to be the subject of our alarming reports. No one wants to be the statistic behind the headlines. So let's hope that going forward, things will change and Syrians will write their own headlines, hopefully of peace, reconciliation, justice, prosperity, and a life in dignity. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Jens. I see Christoph has a question for you.
Hi, apologies for not being in the room with you. I just had a question for Jens on, do we have any idea how many refugees have re-entered Syria since the weekend, from Turkey, I guess, Lebanon? And also, what would be your advice to refugees? Is it time to go home? Should they wait? Yes, that's it. Thanks.
Chris, maybe I'll give the floor to Jennifer on this, and then also we have Shabia online who can speak about the refugee situation. So I'll start with Jennifer.
We
And then Shabia.
of course defer to the High Commissioner for Refugees and the Refugee Agency, but I just want to stress what Mr. Pedersen has stressed, and it continues to stress, that any Syrians returning from areas of displacement, both inside and outside of Syria, their return must be voluntary, dignified, and safe. Refugees have the right to return to their homes whenever they choose to do so. They must, of course, also be provided, as Mr. Pedersen said, with comprehensive support, which includes addressing the unique needs also of women, men, and children. Home, land, and property rights are also among the most pressing needs, and we need the international community to step up here, and this will require strategic attention, particularly for those Syrians returning at this time.
Thank you very much, Jen. I'll give the floor now to Shabia. Maybe if you have numbers, Shabia.
Good morning, everyone. Look, the situation is very fluid, so we are aware of returns of refugees to Lebanon and to Turkey, but we don't have a quantifiable number at present. We are aware that movements continue across the borders, but also within the country. So that is happening. But in terms of the situation, I think the main thing to really emphasize is that any returns need to be voluntary, safe, and dignified. And you would have seen our statement from the High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, yesterday, who basically also reiterated this message that this is a really remarkable opportunity for Syria to move towards peace and for people to begin returning home. As many of you recall, this is actually one of the world's largest displacement crises in terms of refugees who have crossed the borders for safety in neighbouring countries and further afield, and also in terms of those that are displaced inside the country. So millions of refugees are now carefully assessing the situation. They are considering whether it is safe to return home and are following developments. And so our advice as UNHCR is to remain focused on the issue of returns, and patience and vigilance will be very necessary, hoping that developments on the ground will evolve in a positive manner to ensure voluntary, safe, sustainable and dignified returns to occur. And that's it from us.
Thank you very much. Moussassi.
Merci beaucoup. J'ai une question concernant l'activité à la frontière libanaise, parce qu'on a vu beaucoup de Syriens qui essayent d'entrer au Liban. Je voudrais savoir la situation comment aujourd'hui à la frontière, et une question concernant les décisions des pays européens. On a entendu qu'ils ont pris quelques mesures concernant les réfugiés syriens, afin peut-être bientôt une décision de renvoyer les réfugiés syriens en Syrie. Est-ce que je voudrais savoir l'avis de UNHCR concernant cette décision, et est-ce que, parce qu'on a dit tout à l'heure que le retour des Syriens doit être volontiers et non pas forcé, est-ce que ça va à l'encontre de la position de UNHCR? Merci.
Moussa, je crois que je vais devoir traduire.
Regarding Israel activities, Mr. Pedersen has already addressed that we need to see all actors, that includes Israel, acting in line with previous agreements, upholding international law, and immediately de-escalating.
Thank you, Jen. On the activities at the border, I don't know if, and then also in the end, he spoke about refugees. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if Jens or Shabia, you want to address that?
Okay, thank you, Musa. I'll answer in English. I hope that's okay. Look, as I mentioned, millions of Syrian refugees who remain outside are trying to understand what the rapidly changing situation means for them. So they are considering how safe Syria is to return to and how far their rights will be respected before they can make an informed, voluntary decision to return home. So they must be given the space to do so without any pressure. And UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, reiterates that all refugees have the fundamental right to return to their country of origin at a time of their choosing. And all returns must be voluntary, dignified and safe. And so we stand ready to support refugees who are willing to and want to return as conditions allow, while underlining that during such times of uncertainty, that Syrians should also be afforded the flexibility to assess the conditions upon return, such as through go-and-see visits, for instance, which happens in other contexts.
Thank you very much. Jeremy, is that a hand? Yeah, go ahead.
A question for Jens. You mentioned, I think, borders that have been closed and are disturbing the aid, but others are wide open right now. So are you scaling up? Is aid about to pour in Syria? And the question about maybe electricity. Is electricity running right now in Damascus, or due to the situation, do you have shortage? And is that a problem right now for humanitarians?
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, of course, some crossings are open, some are not. We do have reports that the fact that some of the crossings are closed does pose an issue or a problem or challenge for the supply chain, particularly commercial, right? So a lot of things are coming in there. We have already I would say, a robust humanitarian infrastructure in Syria, because we have sadly been there for many years because the needs have been so high. Many things have been sort of upended. I think we can all agree on that in the past couple of weeks. As I briefed across Northwest, Northeast, and so on and so forth, Aleppo, the partners that we work with within that humanitarian architecture are responding and delivering material aid to people who need it. I think at the current moment, with particular focus on the newly displaced, many of whom have left with little or nothing. And it is getting cold. It's winter. So we need that urgent, immediate, life-saving response. Of course, we have the intention of scaling up so that we, hopefully to a larger degree, can meet all the needs that are in Syria. A main challenge to that is the funding. We have an active 4 billion appeal. It's less than a third funded. I checked this morning, 32% at the current time. So there is nothing, literally nothing, that stops any donor of goodwill to put money against that appeal today. And it would certainly, it has to be part of the response of solidarity and compassion from the international community with a country which is in a very fragile situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gabriela, you have a follow-up?
Yes, thank you. Well, it's a kind of follow-up of the other question for Jens. So you have Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, etc., etc. So I want to know if your team can cope with another humanitarian crisis in Syria.
This is a question we would not like to answer, isn't it?
Thank you, Gabriela. You mentioned just a small percentage of the actual volume of humanitarian needs and the number of crises that we are dealing with. We are in all the major humanitarian crises in the world where there is an international response. That is our mandate. That is our job. We will continue to do that to the best of our ability. We need the support and the resources required to do so, of course.
But it's true. If we could do without another crisis, could we? Musa, and then I think this is the last one on Syria. Musa, again. If you could speak English, it would be easier. Otherwise, we can translate. You really have a problem in connecting, Musa. Maybe you can just put down your question in the chat.
It's okay.
Ah, voilà,
it's
ça
okay.
marche,
It's
ça
okay.
marche, ça marche.
I return in English. My question concerning the Syrian in the border between Syria and Lebanon. I saw 2 hours and days ago many Syrians waiting to come to Lebanon. I want to know if you have some details about this situation, the number of Syrians trying to come to Lebanon. And my second question concerning the No.
What, Musa? We are
Yes. I mean, yeah. The question about the European measures. Yeah, you know that some European countries take some measures concerning the Syrian refugees in Europe. I want to know just the opinion of UNHCR concerning that. Thank you.
Maybe this is for you, Shadia.
Musa, just in terms of the movements of people from Lebanon and Syria, you are aware that the movements are dual, with people also fleeing from Lebanon to Syria, and then now we are also aware of reports of Syrians who are returning from Lebanon to Syria. So some movements have been reported through the Masna border crossing in the Bekaa, and we understand that official border crossings in northern Lebanon are currently closed, while returns are being reported through unofficial border crossings in areas such as Wadi Khalid. And according to the Lebanese General Security Office, measures have been announced to facilitate returns to Syria. We understood, and this is the information I had as of yesterday, that immigration structures on the Syrian side are reportedly not currently functioning. And we're also aware of Syrian refugees continue returning through Turkey, through Bab al-Hawa and Bab al-Salam border crossing in the northwest of Syria. So, as I mentioned before, we're aware of thousands of Syrians fleeing at the same time Syria into Lebanon, and of Syrians fleeing to other areas. But when we have further updates on that, we can share that with you. So, with regards to your question about the measures that were announced, so we take note of the reporting of the suspension of asylum applications from Syrian nationals. So just to reiterate that, we see that events are rapidly unfolding and the situation is changing. So the displacement dynamics are continuing. So what is important is that to bear in mind the fluidity of the situation, and that any Syrian or anyone seeking international protection must be able to access asylum procedures and have their application examined fully and individually on its merits. So while this is happening and the suspensions have been reported, we understand this is until such time as the situation in the country has stabilized and reliable information about the security and human rights situation is available to assess the international protection needs of individual applicants. So also, once conditions are clear, we hope that we will be able to provide guidance to states on the international protection needs of relevant profiles of Syrians at risk. So we take note of the suspension, but it's also important to reiterate that Syrian asylum seekers who are waiting for a resumption of the decision-making on their claims, they should continue to be granted the same rights as all other asylum seekers, including in terms of reception conditions, and no asylum seeker should be forcibly returned, as this would violate the principle of non-refoulement, or the obligation on states. And we will continue to call on all states to ensure access to territory, asylum, and protection for individuals who seek safety. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the colleagues. I don't see other questions. Thanks a lot. We'll continue now with the briefing on another very dire situation with Olga. If you can come to the podium for an update on the refugee situation in South Sudan. Thanks, colleagues. Thank you very much, Jan, for Gair too.
Hello, everyone. So we know that the eyes are elsewhere these days, but we thought it's important to come here and brief you about some worrying developments we are observing in Sudan and escalating arrivals of refugees in South Sudan. So UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, is alarmed by the recent surge of people arriving to South Sudan in need of protection and assistance, with tens of thousands of people fleeing new violence in border areas in Sudan. More than 20,000 Sudanese from border villages crossed into South Sudan last week, tripling the number of daily arrivals compared to previous weeks. Since Saturday, there have been an additional estimated 7,000 to 10,000 new arrivals each day, now including more South Sudanese refugees that are leaving the camps in White Nile State, where they have been residing in Sudan. The majority of those displaced are women and children. In addition to the main border crossing at Joda, which is the border crossing between Sudan and South Sudan, many are arriving at informal crossing points, which are extremely difficult for UNHCR and partners to access. All are in need of life-saving humanitarian support, with water and healthcare being the most urgent needs, especially given the ongoing cholera outbreak. The transit centers in Renk are already overcrowded, sheltering nearly 17,000 people. A UNHCR team that visited the border yesterday met thousands of people walking along the 40 kilometers road between the border and the town of Renk in an uninterrupted line. Families had also stopped by the side of the road, with some receiving food and water from local communities. UNHCR and partners are scaling up efforts to support these new arrivals and strengthen basic services, but severe underfunding remains a challenge. Inside Sudan, hostilities around refugee camps and areas hosting displaced Sudanese pose grave and worrying risks to civilians, including refugees and displaced people. UNHCR calls for the respect of international humanitarian law and the civilian nature of refugee camps, which must remain safe havens for those fleeing violence, with humanitarian assets and supplies safeguarded. White Nile State, where we are seeing the escalation, hosts over 400,000 South Sudanese refugees in 10 refugee camps, and more than 650,000 displaced Sudanese who have fled conflict in other parts of the country. Since the start of the war in Sudan 20 months ago, the southern state has been a safe haven for those escaping violence in other parts of the country. Following the latest escalation of hostilities, many refugees have moved from the 3 most impacted camps, with some heading to South Sudan and others moving across the Nile to 7 camps that remain unaffected at the moment. Military activity and heightened tensions at the border crossing between Sudan and South Sudan, the Joda border crossing, is also deeply concerning. This critical crossing point between Sudan and South Sudan serves as a vital lifeline for civilians fleeing violence and for humanitarian operations in White Nile State. Of the 900,000 people who have crossed into South Sudan since the start of the conflict, more than 700,000 have used this border crossing to seek safety. Keeping it safe and open is essential for those seeking safety and for providing emergency aid to displaced populations on both sides of the border. So just a final recap on the numbers and the figures as we stand today. Since the war started in Sudan in April 2023, more than 12 million people have been displaced, including over 3 million who have sought refuge in neighboring countries, making this one of the largest and most pressing crises in the world.
Thank you very much, Olga. Any question? This terrible situation. Don't see any in the room. Catherine Fiancon.
Good morning, Alessandra. Good morning, Olga. Do you hear me?
Not too clearly, but we can.
So maybe it's better like that?
Much better now.
Yes,
thank
perfect. Thank you, Olga, for the briefing on the situation. Do you think that first of all, do you expect more people to cross in the coming days? And do you have enough people and goods to support the refugees, the people that are crossing? Is there any emergency need of something? Thank you, Olga.
Thanks for your question, Catherine. So we are actually following the developments inside Sudan like very closely. It is difficult to speculate, but indeed, if the situation continues as it has in the past few days, we are preparing for an increase in arrivals. I mean, already the numbers are quite frightening, seeing that the numbers have tripled from previous weeks, and also over the weekend, as I mentioned, colleagues estimate between 7,000 and 10,000 new arrivals each day. Of course, some of the people are leaving because of direct impacts by the violence, but others also, especially refugees, are telling us because of increased fears of how the situation can evolve in the next few days. Our teams are on the ground, UNHCR and partners, but of course the situation is extremely worrying in terms of humanitarian assistance. The whole regional refugee response plan remains severely underfunded, with only 30% of the funds, so less than a third, and we heard it twice today in the briefing being covered. There is extremely need for water, for healthcare, but also, as I mentioned, like the main transit center at the border, transit centers at the border in Renk, they are already overcrowded. So there is a need for more funds to expand those transit centers and to support also relocations to other parts of the country of those crossing the border.
Thank you very much, Olga. Catherine has a follow-up.
Yes, thank you, Alessandra. Olga, do you have a figure to share? What are the financial need to expand the center at the border? Do you know how much money is needed to do that? Thank you.
Catherine, I don't have with me the exact figure needed to expand the transit centers, but I can get it to you. I can get the financial requirements for that specific intervention following the briefing, if that's okay.
Thank you, Olga. Any other question? If not, we'll thank very much, Olga, for this update on this very dire situation. I give the floor now to UNECE, Thomas Kroll-Knight, on the Air Convention.
Thank you, Alessandra. Good morning, everybody. We are sat here in Europe where life expectancy is 1 year greater than it would have been without a treaty on air pollution known as the UNECE Air Convention. 1 whole year. This week in Geneva, countries from across the pan-European region and North America are gathering to mark 45 years since its adoption. And in times of tension, we can look to this history of cooperation. That's why I'm here today. As temperatures in the Northern Hemisphere plunge and geopolitical relations continue to fracture and freeze, winter is also when air pollution is at its